Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everyone. This is Jeff Rumburg. I'm a managing partner with MetricNet, and I will be your presenter for today's webcast on the current state of desktop support. I want to welcome all of you and thank you for participating in our webcast today. And I want to thank BrightTalk for inviting MetricNet to speak on this topic. Before I get started, I have just a few administrative announcements to make. During our webcast today, all of you will be in listen-only mode. But if you have any questions during the webcast, you'll notice a questions button just below the image of my slides. And during the webcast, you can click that button and type in your questions as the webcast progresses. I'll wrap up my presentation a few minutes early to answer any questions that you type in during the webcast. Just by way of quick introduction, MetricNet's core business is metrics, benchmarking, and sourcing initiatives. We conduct IT service desk and desktop support benchmarks in virtually every industry, and we now have the largest database of IT process and performance indicators in the industry. Additionally, we've negotiated some of the largest IT outsourcing deals in the industry and continue to work with both managed service providers and their clients to develop contracts that are mutually beneficial for both parties. Now, if you're interested, you can download today's presentation as well as some related attachments by simply clicking on the attachments button. We have two polls in our webcast today. So when we get to those polls, we will ask you to vote on those when they come up. And of course, we would ask you to rate our webcast and leave us any feedback that you would like when we exit the webcast today. Okay, let's go ahead and get started. First point I'd like to make is that everything you see and hear today is empirical in nature. MetricNet and its predecessor companies have been doing this now for 30 years. And so we have the industry's largest database of IT process and performance indicators backed up by more than 4,000 service and support benchmarks. Our database is global, covering more than 50 countries worldwide. We track more than 70 metrics and key performance indicators. And we've created a best practices taxonomy that includes nearly 120 industry best practices. So today's presentation is very much empirical. What did we see and observe 12 years ago in desktop support? What did we see and observe prior to the pandemic in desktop support? And how has it changed? Because the last 3 years have dramatically changed the nature of desktop support and field services. And as they say, necessity is the mother of invention. And during the pandemic, there were a lot of challenges, and the necessity was to continue delivering service. In many cases, services delivered remotely that had historically been delivered on site, face-to-face, device side, and so on. So the industry has changed fairly dramatically as a result of the pandemic. Some of those changes have been very positive because we've seen a lot of shift left as a result of the pandemic and a lot of remote desktop support that has emerged and matured as a result of the pandemic. And so what we have now is a desktop support activity that worldwide is more mature than it was prior to the pandemic. But what I'll be sharing with you today is, as I mentioned a moment ago, empirical in nature. There's nothing hypothetical about it. There's nothing academic about it. We're simply sharing with you our observations from 30 years of experience benchmarking this activity. This brings us to our first polling question. We are always interested in knowing what the demographics of our viewer population is. So we're interested in knowing what your role is as it relates to desktop support. Are you working on a service desk that does 100% remote support? Are you working in a pure traditional desktop support organization that does everything on site or device side? Are you involved in a hybrid support organization where you do both remote support and on-site support? Sometimes these are called jump and run service desks. That is, you try and resolve remotely over the phone or through a chat or an email channel. And if you can't resolve remotely, you jump and you run to the site of the device or the user. The fourth choice, of course, is not applicable if you're a consultant or you're someone who's not affiliated with a service desk or a desktop support organization, you would make that selection. So please weigh in on that. Let us know what your involvement is with desktop support. Let me share some data with you over a 13-year period of time from 2010 to 2022. And again, this is all empirical. These are based on benchmarks that MetricNet has completed in this industry, several thousand benchmarks since the founding of the company. Now, the metrics that are shown on this page would be considered KPIs, key performance indicators. There's a difference. Not every metric is a KPI, but every KPI is a metric. We're showing these because they are the most important key performance indicators for a desktop support group. First metric is a foundation metric. Cost per ticket is a measure of efficiency. And the cost per ticket from 2010 to 2022 dropped from $110 to $92. That was a 16.1% drop. Now, the reason for that is that desktop support organizations are becoming more efficient. About halfway down the page, you see that utilization has gone up by 3.9%. But the bigger reason for the cost per ticket going down is that the complexity of the desktop environment has been reduced through virtualization, through standardization, standard desktop support, desktop images. And as a result, the work time per ticket is lower now than it was back in 2010. So we see a 16% reduction in cost per ticket. Meanwhile, customer satisfaction has gone up marginally, but it has still gone up. The first contact or first visit resolution rate is dropped by 11.5%. The reason for that is that desktop support organizations have been very successful at shifting left and pushing tickets to level 1 support or even self-help, self-service, or in some cases eliminating tickets through problem management. And what's left over is a more complex ticket set, and the first contact resolution rate has dropped by 11.5% due to the greater complexity of those tickets. Now, the percent resolved level 1 capable, this is one of the most impressive changes over the last 13 years. This measures the percentage of tickets resolved by desktop support that could have and should have been resolved at level 1. Back in 2010, more than a third of all tickets resolved at desktop support should have been resolved at level 1. By 2022, that number was only 14%. That was a 61% decrease. That's good. When you're shifting left, that number drops. A best practices number there, if you want to know what the best performers look like, they're at about 5%, meaning 5% of the tickets they resolve in desktop support could have and should have been resolved at level 1. But this is a remarkable drop. It's a remarkable improvement in performance to go from more than a third of tickets that could have been and should have been resolved at level 1 to just 14% of tickets. Utilization, as I mentioned earlier, has increased somewhat due to better workforce scheduling practices and better dispatching practices and better queue management practices. The service levels have gone in the wrong direction. In terms of incident mean time to resolve, it's gone from 12.6 business hours to 19.4 business hours. Think of 8 business hours representing a business day. So 12.6 business hours is a day and a half. 19.4 business hours is more than 2 days. Mean time to fulfill service requests has gone from 5.5 to 6.6 days. So both the service levels have increased, and as a result, we've also seen an increase in ticket backlog. Technician job satisfaction has dropped. It's gone from 80.5% to 77.3%. And there are some reasons for that, which I will discuss as we get a little bit deeper into our discussion of the current state of desktop support. But if you want to look over a 13-year period of time, what happened from 2010 to 2022, this has literally thousands of data points in it. And so you're seeing how cost, quality, productivity, service level, and technician metrics have evolved over the last 13 years. Now, at a very high level, if we take a 30,000-foot view of the current state of desktop support, the mega trends are as follows. Shift left has become high priority. That is, move a ticket to level 1 if possible, or eliminate it through self-help, self-service, or eliminate it through problem management if you can. Hybrid environments, that simply means techs that are doing both remote support as well as desk side or device side support. They're becoming a lot more common. It's very common to hear about hybrid support now. Incident reduction and service request reduction through problem management are starting to gain more traction. but it's not because organizations are maturing their idle initiatives. In fact, I don't know of a single organization that has been successful across the board with their idle initiatives. And there's a lot of reasons for that. If you are interested, you can look at the Idle Hacks video series on the MetricNet website where we talk about this. But the fact is, the machine learning and AI tools that are available now are starting to automate problem management, which is a good thing because humans were never very good at it, not because they didn't have the intelligence to do it, but because they never had the time to do it. Whenever somebody was assigned to be a problem manager, it was usually in addition to other responsibilities they had. And that, combined with the fact that there's high turnover in this industry, meant that nobody ever really spent very much time doing problem management. But the AI and machine learning tools are getting better at problem management, and that's why we're starting to see traction there in the elimination of problems from a root cause perspective using automation. Technician retention strategies. There's a variety of retention strategies, training, coaching, career pathing, and compensation are the big drivers there, and we'll talk about what's happening in that space. Technician compensation is increasing. That is one of the technician retention strategies, and accountability is increasing. Now, unfortunately, the word accountability has some negative connotations, and it's too bad because accountability is a good thing. We all are accountable to others in our life, the people we work with, our families. There's a whole lot of individuals that we are all accountable for, and it's not a bad thing. In this environment, what we're starting to see is more and more individual technician accountability, and it's been very, very good for the industry, as you'll see. Let's take a deeper dive on each one of these industry mega trends. We're going to start by taking a look at the shift left diagram. What this is showing is for 2022, what was the fully loaded cost of resolving a ticket at different levels in the organization. Going all the way from the far right, vendor support on average $600 per ticket. By the way, these are averages. The variations around these numbers are quite extreme. We've seen vendor tickets resolved for $50, and we've seen them resolved for $25,000. Field support tickets average $221 fully loaded. Fully loaded simply means technicians, salaries and benefits, plus indirect, meaning team leads, workforce schedulers, QA, QC, supervisors, and the like. All the personnel, salaries and benefits, plus the overhead, meaning the facilities expense, the technology licensing fees, the travel, training, telecommunications. So fully loaded cost divided by ticket volume, $221 for field support, $104 when a ticket gets escalated to some level in IT, like a NOC or an application group. And again, these are averages. The standard deviation around these numbers is pretty substantial. Desktop support, just under $70 a ticket. Service desk fully loaded, $22 a ticket last year. Self-help, self-service is only $2. It depends on the volume of tickets you drive through the self-help channel, but on average, you're looking at about $2 a ticket. Problem management, there's really a positive contribution to economic value there, because if you eliminate an incident from a root cause perspective using problem management, you're actually preventing a loss in productivity for the customers that you are supporting. So Zero really understates the benefit of problem management. By eliminating incidents and service requests from a root cause perspective, you are preventing that disruption to one or more users. You're preventing that loss in productivity to one or more users. Now, 2022 marked the first time I felt comfortable putting level -2 on this chart. Level -2 represents seek and destroy or search and destroy. So you can think of endpoint bots, machine learning endpoint bots that detect anomalies in the endpoints and will either self-correct them, take a device offline, or potentially send an alert to IT. There's also machine learning AI that ingests data from the ITSM system, from the telephony system, from your remote tool, whether it's BombGuard or LogMeIn or any other tool, and will use that data, compare it to past data, and identify, again, anomalies that can potentially turn into tickets, either incidents or service requests. So the machine learning AI tools are starting to mature, and we're starting to see a significant volume of tickets being eliminated from a root cause perspective altogether at level -2 through artificial intelligence and machine learning. Now, we added to this chart RDS remote desktop support. which essentially means that technicians do everything they can to resolve an incident remotely. And if they can't do it, they go to the site of the device or the user. That's essentially what RDS is. The reason we've left blank the fully loaded cost per ticket is because the level of the cost of an RDS ticket could approach that of a service desk if most of your resolutions are done remotely, or it could approach the cost of desktop support, roughly $70 a ticket, if you're doing very little remotely. The goal would be to do as much as you can remotely, thereby avoiding travel time per ticket. So the extent to which you do shift left and you do approach 100% remote resolution, that RDS cost is going to be very close to a service desk cost per ticket. And by contrast, if you're not resolving very much remotely at desktop support, you're going to be closer to that $69 cost per ticket. So be thinking in terms of shift left. How do you move desktop tickets to RDS? How do you move RDS tickets to the service desk? But remote desktop support essentially means hybrid desktop support. First line of defense is remote troubleshooting. The next step would be to jump and run. That is, go to the site of the user or the device. Now, if we look at problem management, the whole purpose of problem management is to reduce the inconvenience and the lost productivity on the part of end users. In fact, one of my favorite questions when I'm working on behalf of a client that is looking to procure outsourced services from an MSP, a managed service provider, for either level 1 support or desktop support or field services is, what is the single most important function of IT support? And I've never gotten a right answer from an MSP. I'm not trying to knock them, but they say things like, return to service as quickly as possible, and reduce the speed of answer, or maximize the customer satisfaction, or reduce the cost per ticket. And none of those are accurate. What you're trying to do is make your customers, your end user population, as productive as they can possibly be. And one way to do that is to eliminate tickets, reduce the volume of tickets on a per capita basis. When we look at this chart, what we're looking at is organizations that don't have any active problem management initiatives average about 1.3 tickets per user per month. When they have an active problem management function, that number is only 1.03 tickets per user per month. That might not sound like a lot, but 0.3 tickets per user per month, a third of a ticket per user per month multiplied by 12 months, that's 4 tickets per user per year. The average ticket results in a lost productivity of 1 to 2 hours per user. So you're saving every user in your organization between 4 and 8 productive hours if you simply engage in problem management and you are average, as this chart is showing. And so problem management reduces incident volumes. As I've mentioned, I'm not an idle hater, but the evidence is pretty overwhelming that shows that these big 3 idle practices, they've gone from processes to practices, 34 practices in idle 4. The big 3 are problem incident and knowledge management. And I have yet to see an organization that has matured those 3 practices, let alone all 34 idle practices. And this is not a knock on idle, but it gets to the high turnover of the industry. Nobody stays in this position for very long. And also the fact that when somebody is asked to do problem incident or knowledge management, they're usually asked to do that on top of their existing job and responsibilities. So if you've already got a 40 or 50 or 60 hour a week job and somebody says, by the way, we want you to do problem management as well, you can imagine how much priority would be placed on problem management, which is essentially almost none. Most organizations simply don't devote the resources to ever mature these idle practices. But AI is coming to the rescue. We're starting to see significant advances in those 3 idle practices, problem incident knowledge management, with AI tools that have automated the detection and elimination of problems before they generate tickets, either incidents or service requests. So problem management is reducing incident volumes, but it's not because the problem managers are good or getting better, or that organizations are maturing problem management, it's because the AI tools are actually better at it than humans are. There's a whole lot of technician retention strategies in play. Let's look at our cause and effect diagram for desktop support. What we're showing here is the interconnectedness of the metrics around desktop support. The dark blue boxes represent KPIs, key performance indicators. The light blue boxes are also metrics, but they're not key performance indicators. Now, if we look at the drivers of technician job satisfaction, I've mentioned them already. They're coaching, training, career pathing, and compensation. So what do you do to retain agents? Well, you give them a career path, or technicians, I should say. You give them a career path. You give them effective and adequate training, as well as effective and adequate coaching. But don't underestimate the value of compensation. All this dogma about employees not caring about how much they get paid, they just want rewarding work. It's nonsense. Everybody's motivated by compensation. And that's one way to move the needle in terms of technician job satisfaction. So I want to dispel this myth that if you give technicians a good working environment and you just coach and career path and train them, you're going to have great custom technician job satisfaction. Part of that's true, but compensation is a big lever as well. And if you have control over that lever, there are some situations where it may make sense to revisit compensation levels for your technicians. And I'll elaborate on that here on what's called the wage rate paradox. And essentially what this says is that if you go out and you hire the lowest cost resources you can, let's say that you can find desktop techs for $30,000 a year somewhere in North America, and you give them a little bit of training and you have them start working on desktop support tickets. They may seem like low-cost resources, but the fact is their resolution rate will not be very high, meaning their first contact resolution rate will not be very high. Their work times will be long, and the quality of the service that they deliver is simply not going to be there because they don't have the experience, they don't have the education. They're just not qualified to do this job. And so they may seem like low-cost resources, but what you're doing is increasing your total cost of ownership because you're not shifting left, you're shifting right. You're moving tickets out to field services or to vendor support or to level 3 IT or some other source of support that's to the right of level 1 support or desktop support. So your costs go up. The paradox is this: if you increase compensation for the techs, you attract a more qualified, better educated, more experienced technician. And you're going to pay more for that technician, but your TCO, your total cost of ownership, goes down because they know how to shift left. They know how to resolve remotely, and they know how to resolve on first contact. You actually reduce your TCO by increasing your compensation. Now, the numbers we've shown here are hypothetical. The low point, meaning what's the apex, where the first derivative is set at 0, meaning there's 0 slope in the inflection point at the bottom of this curve. How do you figure that out? Well, it's going to differ depending upon where you are in the world because wage rates differ. If you're in a low-cost country in Eastern Europe, for example, this apex might be $20,000 per year to minimize your TCO for desktop support. In certain cities in North America, $52K is about right. This is the case right outside of Washington, D.C., in the suburbs of Northern Virginia. If you look at all the government contractors that work there, they hire lots and lots of desktop support techs, not just for their own companies, but also to staff government entity desktop support functions at the Pentagon and DOJ and Department of the Interior and all of the other government agencies in and around the Washington, D.C. area. If you're paying those techs about $52K a year, you're going to be very close to minimizing your TCO. However, that apex, that is that starting on compensation, is going to look different in Chicago and New York City and Silicon Valley. It's going to be higher than that. And if you're talking about someplace like Paducah, Kentucky, or Tallahassee, Florida, some of these lower cost regions of the country, the number is going to be less than that. You might be able to hit that minimum TCO at $45,000 per technician per year. But here's the point. If you go out and hire the lowest cost resources you can find, you're actually driving your total cost of ownership up. So it's not, it may seem counterintuitive, but in many cases, what we find is that organizations are not paying too much they're paying too little. They are to the left of this point of minimum TCO because they are under the mistaken belief that if they can get low-cost resources, they're somehow doing their organizations a favor. But if those low-cost resources are not qualified, they're not experienced, they're not educated enough to deliver a high FCR and a high quality of service and resolve on first contact, you're going to be increasing your total cost of ownership. So just something to keep in mind. The vast majority of organizations we work with would actually reduce their total cost of ownership by increasing compensation. Now, hybrid support environments are where you're delivering both remote support as well as desktop or desk side or person side support. However, the skill sets are very different. There's a little bit of mythology in this industry that a great desktop support person will be a good remote person, or a good remote person will be a great desktop support person, but the skill sets are really different. And so delivering support remotely is a unique skill set. Delivering support desk side is a unique skill set. And if you look at the Venn diagram of, overlap great level 1 techs and great desktop techs, the overlap is only about 25%, meaning that if a tech is really good at level 1 support, only about 25% of them will be really good at desktop support, and vice versa. Great desktop supports don't always make great level 1 technicians. So you don't want to be cross-training everybody in your desktop support function. You want to recognize those that have the skill set to deliver both remote support as well as desktop/desk side support. And you don't have to cross-train everybody. It makes no sense. It's not a good idea because of the differences in skill sets. But there are those individuals, roughly 25% of them, that are actually excellent at both remote support as well as desk side support. And that's where we see the overlap in the Venn diagram. These hybrid support environments are becoming more common, but there are a couple of caveats. One is that you got to be co-located with your customers. I mean, that's a given. If you're going to be providing desk side or person side or desktop support, you got to be working amongst your customers. If you're in a different city or a different state or even a different country, there's no such thing as hybrid support, because if you're that far removed from your customer, you can't jump and run. So this assumes that you are co-located with your customers. That's important. The other thing I will mention is that hybrid support environments make more sense at low scale. And I would nominally define low scale as being combined headcount of level 1 techs and desktop support techs of 25 or fewer. As you get to larger and larger technician groups, 40, 50, 100, it starts to make sense to have specialty queues, meaning you have desktop support specialists and you have remote or level 1 specialists. But if you're fewer than 25 technicians, you're going to gain some scale economies by having some cross-trained technicians. And if you keep them separate, let's say you have 5 level 1 techs and 5 desktop support techs, you're probably creating some economies of scale. If you combine those and you have 10 techs, you could probably actually do the job with 9 techs, because some of them would be cross-trained to do both level 1 support and desk side or desktop support. So a couple of key points being made here. One, that not every level 1 tech is going to be a good desk side tech and vice versa. The other being that at low scale, this idea of a hybrid environment makes more sense than at larger scale. At larger scale, it does make sense to have specialty queues, one for desk side / desktop support, one for level 1 support. Nevertheless, every desktop ticket or every field service ticket should start with some kind of remote attempt to resolve the ticket, a conversation with the customer, a diagnostic of the device, whatever it might be. Typically, even a field service or desk side ticket starts with a remote effort to resolve that ticket. I talked about technician accountability being a mega trend. And what we're seeing increasingly is that individual techs have a scorecard. Now, if you've been on prior MetricNet webcasts, you know that we talk a lot about the service desk scorecard and the desktop support scorecard. And the idea is that we would aggregate a group of metrics such as cost per ticket, customer satisfaction, first contact resolution rate, technician utilization, agent job satisfaction, and mean time to resolve. We'd combine those into a scorecard that gives you a single overall measure of performance that ranges from 0 to 100%. Well, the methodology and the tool is so flexible that you can apply it not just at a desktop support level or a service desk level, you can apply it at an individual level. And that's what we're showing here would be an individual technician scorecard. In this case, it's technician number 5. This would represent their performance for the month. They got a great score on CSAT in terms of number of tickets closed. They were at the bottom end of the spectrum. They didn't do well there. In terms of tickets or jobs that were more than 48 hours old, they had none, so they got a good score there. Their backlog was very low, so they got a good score there, and so on. The idea is that there are individual metrics that you can look at, everything from mean time to resolve to ticket backlog to customer satisfaction and first contact resolution rate. They get measured at a technician level, and by putting together a scorecard like this, each tech gets a scorecard or a report card every month, and they can be coached very effectively. So the coaching for this technician number 5 is number of tickets you closed was really low, and you need to you're doing well on CSAT and your backlog of jobs, your average ticket backlog, the age of the average ticket in queue, and so on. You're doing well on most of these metrics, but you're just not very productive. You got to up your game when it comes to the number of tickets you're handling monthly. And also on your FCR, which is low, you need to improve your first contact resolution rate. So that's how I would coach this individual technician. But the idea here is that the way you get great performance out of desktop support or service desk or field services is by driving accountability all the way down to an individual level. This is far more effective, by the way, than, for example, at level 1 support. You're familiar with call monitoring, silent call monitoring. You record 4 calls a month, and then you sit down with every tech and you go through their 4 calls and you grade them. That's really archaic at this point. Nobody's really doing that. If they are, it's done automatically. There's a lot of ACD tools that will allow automatic grading of technician phone calls and chats. But it's not a very comprehensive way to evaluate a technician. A scorecard like this is much more objective and effective at allowing you to deliver actionable feedback to the technicians that work in desktop support and field services. I want to get into a case study now. This is a real case study of an organization that we worked with. They were having some challenges. And a lot of this will probably sound familiar to you, but techs were being asked to support BYOD. And it's most organizations have had some limited BYOD, bring your own device policies for quite some time. But when these policies get out of control, when you've got these off-brand printers or computers or ISPs or phones being supported, what happens is that the techs end up spending a lot of their time on these sort of one-offs, that is devices that they're not used to supporting. And so during the pandemic, we started to see an explosion in this challenge. That is, techs were being asked to support, BYOD, but BYOD became not, here's the list of what you can bring. You can choose between an Apple computer or a Dell computer, for example. But what we saw was a dramatic relaxing or non-enforcement of that standard. And we saw a massive proliferation in the devices that were being supported by the technicians. Secondly, techs were finding it hard to do the troubleshooting with remote employees. They couldn't find them or connect with them. Oftentimes their schedules didn't overlap because remember, a lot of these employees were working from home and a lot of the techs were working from home. And it was making that connection, whether it's verbal, chat, trying to do that first resolution remotely became increasingly difficult. And then, lack of consistency in the end user experience, all the SOPs, standard operating procedures kind of went out the door. But here's what happened as a result of these challenges. If you look on the right-hand side, the MTTR went up, CSAT went down, first contact resolution rate dropped, cost per ticket went up because there was a longer resolution time, more work time per ticket. Ticket backlogs increased. So all the metrics kind of moved in the wrong direction as a result of this. And over the last couple of years, I would say 90% of the desktop support and field service benchmarks we've done have been afflicted with these challenges, have had very comparable challenges. And so as a result of the benchmark, we made some recommendations. They're on the right-hand side of this chart here. We said, look, you need a service catalog because bringing your own device doesn't mean anything goes. You need to be specific about what you do and do not support, because what's hurting you now, or what's killing you now in terms of ticket backlog, mean time to resolve, and everything, are these one-offs. You're being asked to support devices you've never seen before, or you're being asked to support processes you've never seen before. You're asked to show up at the same time the internet service provider is there and make sure that the user is connected properly and that they can gain access to the VPN and all these other things. So there's this new work environment. And what we need to do is narrow down what we support, because we're not going to be all things to all people. Second recommendation was to document the approved processes and procedures for those end users, so they understand that you're not going to come to their house every time they have an issue, that there are certain things that they have to contact their ISP, internet service provider, about. And they need to know that the old model, which is that the tech shows up and does the troubleshooting and does the move, add, change, isn't realistic when most of the employees are working from home. If you're in a high-rise building and you're asked to do that, not a problem, because the travel time from one ticket to another might be only 5 or 10 minutes. Same thing if you're on a campus, meaning a business campus or a college campus. The travel time from one ticket to another is pretty nominal. It might be 10, 15, or 20 minutes. But when your user population is scattered all over multiple cities, counties, states, even countries in some cases, you can't really move quickly from one ticket to another. And so these processes need to be documented so that users understand that they're not going to get, a technician visit every time they have an issue when working from home. Secondly, what about the service desk and how they can facilitate contact with the customers? Remember, one of the big challenges is the inability to connect with the customer. Well, get a couple of phone numbers, not just a cell phone number, but if you got a landline, how can we reach you there? Do you have a WhatsApp number where we can call you? Secondly, add a field for the secondary contact phone number on the ticket itself so that customers can add that secondary number. And then appointment setting. That has dramatically improved efficiency and effectiveness in many desktop support organizations. Now, clearly, if there's an incident where a user or multiple users especially can't work because a network is down or something like that, obviously you don't set an appointment for something like that. It's all hands on deck, and you do everything you can to resolve the issue as quickly as you can. But if you've got a user that says, hey, my keyboard is starting to get glitchy, or my monitor isn't always working the way it should, or I think I need a new device, even though we're not yet at the end of the life cycle. It's not ready for a full refresh at this point. As long as they can continue working without losing much or any productivity, then setting an appointment is a smart thing to do, because you can manage the workload much more effectively. You take some of the spikiness of the Erlang distribution. Erlang C is a probability distribution that describes the rate at which tickets come into a service desk or a desktop support organization. But to the extent that you can flatten out the peaks and valleys in that workload by implementing an appointment setting system, you can use your techs more efficiently by doing that. And so for non-urgent issues, setting an appointment to meet with a desktop tech makes sense. And then in terms of lack of consistency, just documenting SOP, standard operating procedures, for both the remote and the on-site tickets, and publishing those so that everybody understands what the SOPs are, because we are operating in a new world, and it's very rare now to find. In fact, we did some work for a big social media company, you would know the name, where their pre-pandemic support model was literally a tech, wearing a tool belt and a voltmeter and screwdrivers and, every tool you could imagine for fixing a device. And they had hundreds of these techs that worked in the headquarters of this organization. And every time a user had an issue, the tech would usually show up within about 5 minutes. I mean, it was a very high touch model, but an enormously expensive model. They've since gotten away from that out of necessity, because when the headquarters sent everybody home to work, those technicians that had worn the tool belts and carried the voltmeters and the pliers and the wire strippers with them could no longer visit every single customer, and they had to get smart really fast about delivering remote support. And a big part of their success post-pandemic has been that they've re-educated not only the techs, but also the customers about what to expect from remote desktop support. So here's what happened. This organization, thankfully, not everybody follows our recommendations, but when they do, we like it because we make recommendations for a reason. Here's what happened. The cost per ticket went from $81 down to $68. That's a 15.7% decrease in the cost per ticket. That largely happened through shift left. Customer satisfaction went from 73 to 88%, an improvement of 21.6 percentage points, or 21.6%, I should say. FCR improved from 68 to 83.2%. Mean time to resolve incidents and fulfill service requests decreased by about 50% in both cases. Job satisfaction went up, and the ticket backlog went from 22.3 open tickets per technician on average to 7.5 open tickets per technician. Now, I want to emphasize, this isn't rocket science. These are really common challenges that I showed back here on slide 16, with a very common set of predictable outcomes: higher mean times to resolve, lower CSAT, lower FCR, higher cost per ticket, greater ticket backlog, and so on. But the remedy, that is how you get this under control, was also pretty straightforward. It took some work, but it clearly paid off. So the service catalog, educating, re-educating the customer on what to expect from desktop support, getting that secondary phone number, putting in place the appointment setting system, and then documenting processes and procedures and publishing those for both the techs and the end users had a dramatic impact for this organization. This took about a year for them to accomplish, but you can see that they saw dramatic improvements in every single metric. So all of these cells on the far right are green, meaning good. So cost per ticket, it says negative 15%, meaning that it dropped by 15%. That's a good thing. Customer satisfaction, positive 21%. That's a good thing because CSAT went up and so on. So these common sense fixes can have a significant impact on your overall performance. And that's what we saw here with this organization that was grappling with a very common set of desktop support issues. We recommended some pretty straightforward approaches to remedying those issues, and they got dramatic results in under a year's time. So let me summarize. I started with a list of challenges, and now how are these challenges being addressed? Well, prioritizing shift left strategies has become commonplace now. In other words, thinking, how do we turn that desktop ticket into a level 1 ticket? How do we turn that level 1 ticket into a non-ticket through problem management? How do we turn that vendor ticket into a field service or a desktop support ticket? Shifting left reduces your total cost of ownership. Remote desktop support, or leveraging RDS, simply that means if you can resolve it remotely, do it remotely. It doesn't matter if your legacy is that you show up with the tool belt and the voltmeter and the pliers and the wire strippers and all that. That model's gone. There are situations like a move, add, change, or hardware break fix where there may be some necessity for a technician to go on site and replace a broken part or do a swap out of a device, for example. But those are far less than they used to be because organizations have gotten very smart about how to deliver support remotely, remote desktop support. Reduction initiatives, incident reduction initiatives, meaning problem management. You already know my thought on this. I think the idea of training up an individual or a team and putting them responsible for problem management, personally, I think it's a losing proposition. I've never seen it work. However, there are now AI and machine learning tools that are pretty good at problem management. In fact, they're better than any individual problem manager I've seen in this industry. So think seriously about ML and AI and be looking, if you go shopping for a tool like that. I mean, some of these tools have nothing to do with problem management. For example, Watson, not even an AI tool. It's a rules-based tool. But the point is that chatbots and voice bots, some of them don't even touch problem management. But there are other tools that will ingest data from your ITSM system, from your remote tool like BombGuard or LogMeIn, and your knowledge-based system and your telephony systems, and can actually identify causes and potentially eliminate those root causes. Formal retention strategies, remember coaching, training, career pathing, and if you can pull the lever, compensation. If you're like most organizations, 90% of desktop support environments are to the left of that apex. Remember the wage rate paradox? It had the U-shaped curve. Most organizations operate to the left of that apex, meaning the minimum point on that curve, meaning that an increase in technician compensation, not only would it not increase your TCO, it would reduce your total cost of ownership because you get better resolutions remotely, you get better first contact resolution, you get better problem management, you get better shift left, you simply get better results by not hiring from the bottom of the talent pool. To put it very bluntly, not disparaging anybody, but we all know there's a vast difference between a $30,000 a year technician and a $50,000 a year technician. $50,000 a year tech is going to be more qualified, more experienced, is going to have better education. They're going to get you to a better first contact resolution rate, more shift left, higher customer satisfaction, better first contact resolution rate. So analyze and adjust the compensation if you can pull that lever, as I mentioned. And then finally, this scorecard that I showed you, think seriously about driving. It doesn't have to be a complex scorecard, even a couple of metrics like number of tickets handled per month and customer satisfaction. But ideally, there should be an FCR metric in there and also a ticket backlog metric in there and an MTTR metric in there. So they can be a little bit more complicated than just number of tickets handled and customer satisfaction. Number of tickets handled is a proxy for cost, by the way. So it can be a little bit more complicated than that. But the idea is that accountability is not a bad thing. It's a good thing. And the way you get great performance out of a service desk or a desktop support organization or a field service organization or a hybrid organization is to drive that accountability to an individual level. Now, I'm going to get to questions in just a moment, but I do have a final poll that I'm going to ask you to weigh in on. And this poll gives you an opportunity to schedule a free consult with MetricNet. We can call you today or tomorrow if you would like us to. Alternatively, if you'd like us to reach out to you next week, that's fine as well. This is a no obligation call. We can talk about anything you want to talk about, whether it's related to this presentation or not. So anything related to IT service and support that you might want to talk about, get that free half hour of consultation. Just click yes, either right away or yes, next week. Okay. On our website, you'll find a number of educational resources for service and support professionals. We have a headcount calculator that you can download. We have some free ebooks in PDF format that define the most common service desk and desktop support metrics. We also have a performance target calculator so you can establish top quartile performance targets for your service desk or desktop support. We also have an ROI calculator and a template for the service desk. And I think also the desktop support balance scorecard. So if you're interested, you can find a lot of tools on our website, some of them free, some of them you have to pay for. And it's not a sales pitch. I'm just telling you that there are some resources there that may be beneficial to you. And I'd encourage you to take a look at that. Also, keep in mind that our webcasts are always free of charge. And if you like what you've heard here today, I'd encourage you to go to our website to sign up for future webcasts. Next month, I'm going to be covering leadership and how leadership drives better outcomes in IT service and support. Once again, you can download today's presentation, and there's also some associated attachments there. Just click the attachments button. And when you're exiting the webcast, please rank us. Tell us what you think of the webcast. And that'll bring me to the questions that we have. So let me open up the questions dialog box. Okay, we've got a lot of questions. Let me start at the bottom here. Okay, what's the difference between field support and desktop support? Okay, the distinction we make is the following. In desktop support, when you go from ticket to ticket, you're generally going to be walking. You're going to be on foot. In other words, you're co-located with the customer, and the travel time per ticket is usually 20 minutes or less. Field services typically involves much more travel time between tickets. Generally, it involves getting into a vehicle. It's going to be a car, might be a train, might be a plane, but the travel times between tickets are much larger because generally you're supporting disparate field offices. They could be clinics in a healthcare system. They could be local financial planning offices in the financial services industry. They could be restaurants, in the case of restaurant, or store support as an example. So field support requires a vehicle to get from ticket to ticket, whereas desktop support simply requires walking from one ticket to the next. It's a bit of an arbitrary distinction, but field support tickets are quite a bit more expensive than desktop support tickets simply because the travel time associated with each ticket is quite a bit longer for field support than it is for desktop support. Next question, what's the ideal ratio of desktop techs to end users supported? The ideal ratio doesn't exist. It can vary dramatically. In some environments, you will have a single desktop tech for 100 users, and in other environments, you'll have a single desktop tech for 2,000 users. So, and this is an unfortunate fallacy in the industry that there is some magical ratio where you simply look at the number of users supported and divide it by that ratio and magically come up with the number of techs you need. It's not a function of the number of users you're supporting. It's a function of the workload that those users produce. The workload those users produce varies dramatically by vertical market. It's dependent on how well they're trained. It's dependent on what the refresh rate of the environment is. Depends on how distributed they are. In other words, what the travel time is per ticket. So this idea that, and unfortunately, one of my previous employers publishes these ratios and perpetuates this fallacy that there's a proper ratio of level 1 techs to users and a proper ratio of desktop techs or a proper ratio of field service techs to users. It's baloney, to put it nicely. What you have to do is look at the workload, meaning the ticket volume produced, and multiply that by the average ticket handle time. And that will give you, assuming that you look at the monthly values for handle time and ticket volume, that'll give you your monthly workload. And based on that, you can back into what's the right head count. You know, a gas and electric utility might support, 10,000 employees with 10 techs, whereas a fast-moving financial services company might need 100 techs for 10,000 employees. So the workload differs dramatically from one industry to the next, from one company to the next, and it depends on a whole lot of things like the ratio of laptop computers to desktop computers, how well trained your users are, how virtualized your environment is. It's a host of things. So this idea, the ideal ratio, just drop that question altogether. Question is, do you know your workload? And if you know your workload, you can right size your desktop support or field service organization. Next question, why are desktop techs only about half utilized? Isn't 52.9% still really low? No, it's about average. But keep in mind that when we calculate utilization, we don't back out vacation days, sick days, holidays, training days, administrative time. We don't back all that stuff out. We look at pure productivity, which is ticket volume multiplied by ticket handle time, divided by available work minutes in a month, which is about 9,500 work minutes in a month. And it turns out that for service desks, their global average is about 47, 48%. Desktop support average is about 53, 54%. And again, we don't back out all the non-productive time, including holidays and vacation days and sick days and so on and so forth. And so what you end up with is what appears to be a low utilization. But it's not necessarily a low utilization. The reason we calculate utilization this way and don't back out all the non-productive time is because we want to be able to compare everyone in a benchmark based on the same standard. If we're trying to take into account company XYZ's unique leave policies and unique holiday and vacation policies, unique training policies, and so on, we would be forever adjusting data to try and get, an apples to apples comparison, which doesn't really exist. So what we decided to do instead is just treat everyone the same. Productive minutes in the numerator, which is ticket volume multiplied by ticket handle time, divided by available minutes in the denominator, which is technician head count multiplied by the 9,500 available minutes per month. That'll give you the utilization without any fluff built into it. Whenever I see an organization that claims that they've got 80, 90, 95% utilization, I know that they're not talking about utilization, certainly not the way we define it. They're usually talking about occupancy or schedule adherence. And it's quite common that utilization and occupancy are two metrics that are oftentimes conflated and confused with each other. So next question, how do you measure mean time to resolve incidents? Well, it's ticket close time minus ticket open time. If I open a ticket at noon and close it at 4 p.m., that's a 4-hour MTTR, mean time to resolve. Now, sometimes tickets are put in suspend mode. If you're waiting on the user, if you're waiting on parts, if you're waiting on a vendor, you might suspend the ticket for some period of time and the clock stops during that period of time. Also, you have to be careful about business hours versus clock hours. If I open a ticket at noon today and close it at noon tomorrow, that's 24 clock hours, but it's really only 8 business hours. So the more common measure is business hours or business days. And that MTTR, as I mentioned, is ticket close time minus ticket open time minus any suspend time. And some tickets will legitimately go into suspend mode. Again, if you're waiting, for example, on a customer, or if you're waiting on a vendor to provide parts or something like that, you might put a ticket in suspend mode so that the clock stops running. Okay, any recommendations on how to measure level 1 capable? It feels subjective. Yeah, you have to audit your desktop support tickets. Generally, what you're going to do is you're going to look at some percentage of those tickets, maybe 10% of those tickets, and you have to have a very seasoned desktop support person look at those tickets, or a very seasoned level 1 person look at those tickets and pull out the ones that could have and should have been resolved at level 1. So let's just say, for the sake of the argument, that you sample 100 tickets and you have an expert level 1 person or an expert desktop support person go through those tickets and pull out the ones that could have been resolved at level 1. Okay, let's say out of the 100 sample size, 20 of those tickets are pulled with the knowledge and the certainty that these could have and should have been resolved at level 1. So that's a 20% level 1 capable, meaning 20% of the tickets resolved at desktop support were resolvable at level 1. Now, it's only sampling, so it's not, you're not going to look at every single ticket. That doesn't make any sense, but it's not subjective at all. It's rather based on expert opinion, sampling those tickets. But it is extrapolative, which means that we take that sample and we extrapolate it to the whole population. So you may have handled 10,000 tickets in a month. You may only sample 100 tickets, and you're assuming that all those 10,000 tickets are also 20% resolved level 1 capable. So there's some extrapolation involved there, which means that there's some imprecision involved there, but there's nothing about service and support that is precise. There are certain metrics like handle time or ASA or MTTR that can be precise, but most other metrics in IT service and support are only directionally accurate as opposed to precise in an accounting sense where you're confident to two digits past the decimal point. Next question. How does a pending status factor into time, MTTR? I just answered that question. The time that a ticket is pending or suspended would be subtracted from the gross MTTR. So gross MTTR is ticket close time minus ticket open time. If it was in pending status for some of that time, that would be subtracted from it. So if we take a ticket that was open for a week, that's 168 clock hours. But if it was in pending status for 120 of those hours, then the true MTTR would be 168 hours in the week minus 120 hours in the pending mode. So it would be a 48-hour mean time to resolve. Next question, do you see AI bots being an emerging technology trending in desktop support? I would say it's beyond emerging. It's becoming mainstream. But yes, we're seeing a lot of bots, but I view them as a separate channel from level 1 and desktop support. An endpoint bot can potentially identify anomalies and either take a device offline or fix a device or send an alert to IT before it becomes a level 1 ticket or a desktop support ticket. So I almost view AI and bots, and I would add to that, actually bots, most of the bots are not machine learning AI, they're rules-based as opposed to machine learning. But if we think of artificial intelligence and then rules-based bots and then machine learning, and they are different things, I think of that as a channel that competes with, if you will, competes in a good way, with desktop support and level 1 support. So AI, machine learning, and bots can potentially steal market share in a good way from level 1 support and or desktop support and or field services and or level 3 IT and or vendor support. So any and all, tickets are welcome, because when it comes to machine learning and AI, generally you have a fixed cost with that. You might be paying a monthly SaaS fee, but the more volume you drive through that channel, the more workload is taken away from agent support, which is a good thing. If you can reduce labor content of your IT service and support, that's by far the biggest portion of your cost. And if you can have technology resolve or prevent those things, that's a good thing. So I would say it's more than emerging, it's more than trending. It's already here, it's here to stay. And we're even seeing ChatGPT in some applications with some of our clients. Next question, how should a support organization go about calculating current cost per ticket to see where we land against the benchmark? Well, I'll give you kind of a shortcut method. You know what your head count is, and presumably you know what those individuals get paid. So take your technician head count. Let's say you've got 20 techs and they make $50,000 a year each. I'm making the numbers very simple for the sake of this answer. You have 20 techs making $50K each. That's $1 million in payroll per year. Your tech compensation is usually about half of your fully loaded cost. Fully loaded cost, in addition to tech compensation, would be the compensation for your supervisors, team leads, and so on, plus your facilities expense, plus your technology licensing fees, your telecommunications, travel, training, office supplies, all those things. But if you want a shortcut method, just count heads, multiply it by the average annual compensation. The example I gave was 20 techs making on average $50K a year. That's $1 million in payroll. So that would get us to a fully loaded estimated cost of $1 million. And if you double that to $2 million, that gets you, or $1 million is your payroll cost, $2 million would be your estimated fully loaded cost. So that's the shortcut method. So take that $2 million, divide it by the number of tickets that you handle, and that will get you to a cost per ticket. You can do it on a monthly basis as well. You say your techs are making $5,000 a month each, and you got 20 techs, that's $100K. Double that number to $200K, that's your estimated monthly fully loaded cost, divided by the ticket volume. $200,000 per month divided by your monthly ticket volume will get you pretty close to a fully loaded cost per ticket. Keep in mind that on a couple of slides back, I showed some free resources, 2 ebooks that you can download. Those ebooks are in PDF format. You can find them on our website, and they define what a fully loaded cost per ticket is for both level 1 support and for desktop support. Okay. I think that was the last of our questions. So I just want to thank everyone for joining me today for our discussion on the current state of desktop support. I hope you found it to be informative and insightful. This concludes today's webcast. I hope to see you all on next month's webcast. Thank you.